So let's dive in today into the findings of our 2026 evidence report. My name is Lauren Wilson. I am the manager of special projects here at Innovate EDU. Project Unicorn is one of our main portfolios of work here at Innovate EDU. And so we've partnered with Instructure, and they've been our wonderful partners in the work in the creation of this 2026 evidence report. I would love to turn it over to Mary to do a quick introduction of herself.
Thanks, Lauren. Really excited to be here today. My name is Mary Stiers. I'm the Director of Evidence and Learning Strategy at Instructure, formerly oversaw our research team, and really excited to share some of the insights that we have in our evidence report with you all today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mary. So happy you're here. Our goal today is to move quickly through definitions of interoperability, explore the 5 key indicators from our 2026 report, and provide you with some actionable supports for your district. But before we dive in, a quick overview of what is Project Unicorn. Project Unicorn is an effort focused on improving data interoperability in K-12 education. We aim to create a community of innovators who are advocates for secure data exchange, who help support school systems understand that there is a cost of ownership, and how to better understand that through vendors, and making the case for secure interoperability. And to that end, I would love to define interoperability so that we're all working from the same definition today. We define interoperability as the seamless, secure, controlled exchange of data between applications. So not just a technical fix, but where there's tools that transform teaching and that empower parents and students with their own data. So with that, we're going to get to the heart of our discussion today. On the screen, you can see our driving question behind our 2026 evidence report. So what technology belongs in classrooms, for what purpose, and with what evidence of positive impact? That was our driving question behind the work that we did between Innovate EDU and Instructure. And our focus is that EdTech that really moves the needle for students and all students. We want all students to have the chance to be their best learners in the classroom, and outside of the classroom with the best levels of support. That takes really clear standards for evidence and for quality in our tools, in our classrooms, and in our ecosystem. That means we're looking at you all. We're looking to know that this is sort of both a calling in and a calling out for the industry. We need partners in this work to make sure that the ed tech that lands in classrooms and in schools is what's best for students. We need to move past passive consumption and into pedagogical purpose. You're going to hear Mary speak a little bit to this, but really there's a lot of consumer tech out there that does not have the guardrails and the guidelines that are necessary in K-12. And then sort of where I land on this is, and I might quote our CEO, Erin Moat, when she says, innovation moves at the speed of trust. We really need deep partners and we need to work together to be able to move the needle in this work. We are building a movement here around evidence and efficacy. And I guess with that, let me pass it over, Mary, to explain a little bit about the why.
Of course. So there's several different reasons I feel like why the evidence report is particularly relevant this year. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, from a screen time perspective, there's a lot of concerns around cell phones and devices. All of those concerns are really ramping up and increasing. And we have parents and policymakers with real questions about the usage and the benefits. We've seen concerns about mental well-being and addiction from things like the anxious generation and also, media attention. And we've moved beyond these COVID years, right, where students were in front of their computers all the time. And do they really need all of that screen time? So I think that there's real valid concerns to have there. And for the record, I also share those concerns, right? I don't think that we need to be sitting behind our computers all the time in K-12 classrooms. The reality too is that budgets are tightening, So districts are really asking if they can afford to keep multiple tools. Maybe they have multiple math tools, maybe multiple ELA tools, or having to make the difficult decision to keep teachers. And so there's real trade-offs that they're considering that are these real life-changing decisions. And so as a result, just districts and parents and communities are asking these valid questions about, does this tool have the return on investment that we need? If we're investing so much in this tool, is it safe? Is it secure? Is it interoperable? And most importantly, I think from my perspective as a researcher, does it really have the impact that we hope it will? So is this tool really moving the needle? And then we have the standards alignment gap, right? So in all discussions, we've recognized that tools are built for the average consumer are very different than those that are purpose built for education technology. So when you're comparing things like Spotify or Netflix to tools like Kahoot or Newsela, we've realized that these aren't the same. And so this is the conversation that we've, started with Innovate EDU this year, is to define which are ed tech tools and which are consumer tech tools, and how do they differ in the types of evidence that they had behind them. And so we kind of entered with this hypothesis that they were different, but we didn't really know. And so we set to look at what are the top 150 most used tools in K-12 schools over the past school years. We use our Learn platform data from Instructure to take a look at that. And then we categorize these tools as ed tech, or tools that are purpose built for education, versus consumer tech, which are the tools that are kind of just made for the general public. And interestingly, we coded it ourselves and then also had AI help with coding and found alignment there as well. And so we found that with the top 150 tools, roughly 2/3 were education technology tools, and then roughly 1/3 were consumer tech tools. And so if you go to the next slide. And so then taking a look at the different indicators that we looked at, obviously I'm a researcher, so I'm going to start with evidence, research evidence specifically. So one of the biggest things here with research evidence is we're starting to ask questions about, is this tool research-based? Does greater usage of this product or this tool result in better outcomes? Do students who spend more time on this math tool have better math scores? Do students who spend more time on this literacy tool have higher literacy achievement? Can we make causality claims, right? Can we say that use of this tool actually caused higher achievement? And I'm also just going to add I can't talk, add a caveat here that we know that teachers are the most important, right? So these are additive on top of what those classrooms and teachers already offer. So ESSA gives us a great framework for 4 different levels of evidence and ways that we can think about the efficacy or the rigor of research behind a tool. So the first is a randomized control trial, which is level 1. So in a randomized control trial, you're comparing users to non-users of a tool. So students who are randomly selected to use a math tool and another set of students who are randomly selected to not use that math tool. And we're seeing, okay, do they have differences in outcomes or achievement? A quasi-experimental design is the next step below it. So that's a level 2. And in that, you're also comparing, do students who receive this tool outperform students who don't? You're just not randomly assigning them. So those first 2 levels really tell us something about causality, and they give us greater confidence that the tool itself had a positive impact on student achievement. Then you have a correlational study design, which is where you start to ask questions around, does greater usage of this tool relate to more positive outcomes? So when students use this Star Wars intervention, I'm going to use that as one of my favorite examples, right? Do they have higher ELA scores or STEM scores, right? And then a logic model is a level 4. So that's a foundational research report or study, where we're taking a look at what is the research basis behind this tool. When the program developers created this tool, what research did they use to inform development of this tool? And what are their hypothesized benefits for student outcomes? So what would we expect to see with our students? And so that's more of a research basis versus actual research on the tool. And so what we found is we took a look at purpose-built education technology compared to consumer technology, and we found that for education technology tools, 40% of the top 150 that were ed tech tools actually had this ESSA evidence behind it. So one of those 4 tiers. When you compared that to consumer technology, it was only 2%. So you could see this clear disparity in research evidence and one of these four tiers being available for EdTech, purpose-built EdTech versus consumer tech. And then in addition, when you take a look at EdTech specifically, we pulled it out, the statistics for each of the levels. And you can see, so the highest levels of evidence across our EdTech tools were for those bottom tiers, so those correlational studies and research-based designs, versus what we call these causal tiers at the top, so those level 1 and level 2 studies. So, while there is a lot of benefit in terms of research evidence for EdTech tools, and we have a lot there, there's still a lot of room to go. When you think about 60% of tools don't have this evidence yet that's research-based or, causal research. And in addition, a lot of the research that is available on these top used tools is at those lower levels. So really kind of pushing to get higher levels of evidence. And the other thing that I'll just quickly mention about evidence that's important to consider is your local context. We always talk about this with the evidence tiers. And so ultimately, a level 3 study that mirrors your students and your population is ultimately going to be more valuable and tell you more about how this tool could potentially work with your students than a study that's been done at a higher level with students that don't look at all like yours. And so I always say that context matters. All right. The next indicator that I wanted to chat about, I can go on forever about research, but we're going to get to the other indicators, is data compliance. And so this is something that we talk about a lot on my research team is, handling student data and handling it with care. Instructure does a lot of this too. And so does, a lot of these other product companies. And so when we talk about data compliance, that's really talking about ensuring that this data is handled with the utmost respect. We recognize that data is precious. We should be treating it with the utmost care and with the strongest security measures. So there are several companies that monitor student data compliance and ensuring that they meet these high standards set by FERPA and COPA. And so, those are listed here. So the three that we looked at were iKeepSafe, COPA Safe Harbor, iKeepSafe FERPA, and then One EdTech Data Privacy Trusted App certification. So we were looking at kind of similar to those ESSA evidence standards. We were looking at a group of companies that have these certifications, which tools have at least one certification. And so what we found is similar to the research evidence that 33% of EdTech tools had at least one of these certifications. So one of these iKeepSafe or One EdTech certifications compared to 2% of consumer technology. So again, a very large discrepancy there and something to take note of. And then I'll hand it over to you, Lauren, to talk about the next indicator.
Absolutely. The third out of five that we focused on is interoperability. You've already heard me define that today, and what we did here was really look into, you can see the mentions on the slide of what we were doing a deep dive into. But these are the tools that allow the exchange of data between systems to reduce silos and manual retooling and rekeying. And so what we found out here is that only 30% of the purpose-built EdTech tools were currently certified, but this is still significantly higher than what we see in the consumer technology, sitting at 5%. We would love to see an increase in both, and I think especially in the age of AI, interoperability is a prerequisite. Without clean, standard-driven data as a foundation, AI models are prone to things like hallucinations and data leakage and other things that we really need to keep out of our classrooms, knowing that interoperability and safety converging is a must in our future. And so really taking a look at these standards and wanting it to be higher in both respects, but recognizing how much higher, significantly higher it is in purpose-built EdTech. And with that, I'll move into our fourth indicator, which is accessibility. So here you can see already on the slides that this is the one area where consumer technology and EdTech come closer together and have higher percentages across both. So you'll see 71% of the purpose-built EdTech has at least one indicator of accessibility, whereas 50% of the consumer technology do. This is sort of critical to ensure students with disabilities access learning opportunities. And this is a huge focus of what we do across our work, both at Innovate EDU and Instructure, of course, but ensuring that all students have the ability to reach the level of learning that they deserve in their classrooms. This is things we looked at were digital promises learner variability, the CAS UDL certifications, and the WCAG. And so I think taking a look at all three of those, of course, we are pleased to see the increase in percentage and are working hard to continue to drive that up. Back to you, Mary, for the fifth.
Thank you. So the last indicator that we looked at was usability. So when thinking about any product that's sold on the market, you really want to ensure that it's been validated and vetted by actual users. So when you think about, medicine, we want to ensure that it's actually been tested with actual people who are going to receive the medicine, or just kind of anything that goes on the market. We hope that it's been, tested by the people who actually they expect to use it. So usability tells us whether or not there's been actual work done to vet this tool with teachers and students who will actually use the tool. And so there's three really strong potential third-party indicators and validators that are on the market here right now. So the ISTE seal, the Lean Lab co-design product certification, and the Digital Promise Practitioner Informed Design certification. So again, we took a look at these different certifications and whether a tool met at least one of these three indicators in order to meet this usability indicator. And so when we looked at this was actually the lowest performing of the 5 different indicators, but 15% of EdTech tools had this third-party validation that they go to teachers and students for their feedback on the tool, and only 2% of consumer technology. So again, there's a lot of room for growth on this indicator across both EdTech and consumer tech, but we do see that very large disparity here between EdTech and consumer tech as well. So something certainly worth diving deeper into and asking folks to show that third-party evidence that they meet those usability indicators and also these other 4 indicators that we've talked about. So in sum, we do have this informed checklist for districts and states to think about and ask questions around when they go to purchase products or consider products. So the first is asking, what outcome is this tool really intended to improve? Is it intended to improve my students' math or ELA outcomes? Is it intended to help with students' social emotional learning? What evidence or research supports that claim? Is it that foundational SF4 research-based tier, or is it a higher tier? Does that research look similar to your students and your context? And then what is the cost in attention or time for you, for your teachers, for your students, and why is it worth it? Because we know time is so precious. In addition, we ask what student data is collected, so thinking about that data privacy indicator, and what safeguards does the district have or does the product have in ensuring that student data is protected? Then asking things like, how will this fit into our ecosystem and workflows? And does this product have a documented VPAT or a voluntary product accessibility template? There are a lot of products that do have this publicly available, which is fantastic per the DOJ ruling, but there still can be room and areas for opportunity and growth there. And then do teachers and learners find the product accessible and easy to use? Have they asked for their feedback? And then what reporting will the district get? And what decisions will that enable? So there's a lot of different questions here. I do want to call out that I know I had specific questions. These are also detailed in the evidence report, which we'll share at the end of the call, and you'll get all of the statistics and everything too. So don't feel like you have to write everything down all at once. And with that, I think, Lauren, I'm handing it over to you.
Absolutely. So I get the privilege of talking a little bit about the conversations that we've had, but I also want to name that we have a conversation space with you all on this call coming up. So if you do have questions that are coming to your mind, please feel free to drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A. We're really looking forward to diving into a discussion here in just a little bit. But this quote on the screen really resonated. We've had the privilege of talking with different districts and teams across the state since our release of this report at South by Southwest in March. And I'm going to take a second to actually read this quote out loud. It's from a district leader, a superintendent in Rhode Island, and she mentions, if the evidence base isn't there, we don't have the time or the funds to waste. Not to mention, teachers give a lot of feedback that if we're consistently switching tools each year, they're shutting down. They're not wanting us to pivot one more time. And so it's really important that we get it right from the onset and that we're bringing them the best tools to use so that our students can thrive. Um, Here, we're really diving into this is not a buy and try time anymore. It's a prove it or lose it mentality where we need to demand high standards for research, for safety, for quality to ensure that we're looking at the instructional problem that people are trying to solve. So that's our message, and it's clear. We as we've been talking again with different districts and teams, that's the clear message we're receiving. So it's up to us. As we mentioned, we are in community with you all, and we are really we're privileged and we're excited to hold this space. So now I'd love to open it up to Q&A. Mary and I are here to answer all the questions that you have. And as you see, our team just dropped the 2026 evidence report link directly for you. So if you want to take a second, we know you're dying to get it in your hands. And so please do feel free to open that up right now. Take a look if you haven't seen it already. There's a lot of meat in that report, and what we just highlighted for you is some of the main points. So we'd love to open it up to why you're here and what you wanted to get out of this conversation. Please raise any questions for us to dive into. Okay, I'm seeing one, Mary, so I will read it out loud for us and we can go from there. So usability is noted as the least adopted indicator at only 15%, as you mentioned. What can districts do collectively to demand that vendors prioritize practitioner-informed design? I'll pass
Yeah,
that
of
over to you first.
course, that's a great question. So, I think usability is one of those things, and I'll say too, I loved Aaron Moat's quote at the beginning, Lauren, because one of the things that Carl Rectanis, who's one of our or was our CEO at Learn Platform, used to always say is that things weren't going to change until districts started to demand it. And so when I think about these different indicators and usability research, data privacy, things aren't going to change until districts start to demand that these providers show proof that they meet these different indicators, right? That they show third party proof that they actually meet these usability indicators, that they've done rigorous research. And so I would say for usability in particular, that's not one that I've heard come up a lot in recent years in terms of being really prevalent. I've heard data privacy and interoperability and certainly research come up as important. But we're really pushing these 5 different indicators because we believe that they're really key. And when we think about these tools, ed tech tools, consumer tech tools that are used in classrooms, ultimately you don't want to waste, and I think that was a great quote, but you don't want to waste time on tools that have never been put in front of teachers and students. And so it's really important to demand that providers show that they've actually, got feedback from teachers and students and they've done their due diligence there. So that's what I would say for that one. Lauren, do you have any other things that you would add?
Yes. No, I mean, just to echo, I think us doing what we can to generate community around this and to involve partners is really where, as we can start to see the demand across different a diverse set of district states and ed tech partners. That's where I think we'll really lean into the collective use of how we can come together in this work as everything that you mentioned. I'll open it up. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, we do have a couple of more. I will read this one out loud. Question 2 is, How can districts use the findings from our 2026 evidence report to answer parent and policymaker concerns regarding the screen time reckoning? I know you mentioned that at the top and part of your work. So Mary, does something come to mind for you on that one?
Yeah, I think Lauren, you alluded to this earlier, and we could certainly. I'm glad we're bringing it up again. But we talked a lot between Instructure and Innovate EDU around the difference between kind of passive technology and active technology. When you think about consumer tech, it tends to be pretty passive. It's just kind of sit and get a lot of information, whereas EdTech tends to be more active and engaging, right? And so those are different types of things. The other thing that I want to call out related to the screen time reckoning is that a lot of times it's been focused on social media and the negative effects on attention and student well-being and that kind of thing. And those are valid concerns. I would also say that ed tech, when it's purpose built for the classroom, is different and recognizing that. And then also, when I think about talking to parents and policymakers, really taking a look at holding them all these different tools to this litmus test, right? So social media and these other things, like do they belong in the classroom, when, and at what time, and for what purpose, and for which students? Those are all important questions. And so I think it's a little bit of changing the narrative to say it's a little bit more nuanced than all ed tech or all, technology is bad, but it really depends on using it for a specific use case for specific students and with intention for tools that have positive impact.
Yes, absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that, I agree completely with everything. Um, there's also an opportunity, I think, to involve, I'll talk to the parent piece for a second, to involve parents in sitting with their child to sort of see the technology themselves. I think that's something that, as you'll see, consumer technology is one thing, and one thing that's pretty prevalent in parents' lives, but having accessibility or access to some ed tech tools that you can see and do some side by side with your students, and see what they're experiencing in the classroom. I think as a former second and third grade teacher myself, that was always something that was really important to me, is involving parents in the both the reasoning behind. So I think there's a real opportunity here for educators themselves to hold the mic for a minute and say, these are the tools that are really benefiting my students for what reasons, and being able to see it for themselves. Great. With that, I think, let's see, are there any more? There is one more. Data-driven decisions becoming increasingly common, regardless of whether their human-centered approach is used or not. How can we ensure that decision makers do not rely exclusively on data or alter the workforce ecosystem without a clear, structured approach, especially in the AI era? What a good question from our audience.
Yeah, that's it's a great question. I'm just reflecting on it a little bit more. I think to your point, like relying exclusively on data and like making, I think what you're asking is making quick decisions without understanding the bigger picture.
Mhm.
I believe that's where you're going with that. And so, yes, I think it's important to take a look at all these different five indicators and really talk to a variety of stakeholders to see which tools fit best, right? And so, um, back in my Learn platform days prior to coming to Instructure, we talked a lot with district administrators about which ed tech tools they were using and help them to kind of parse through those different tools. But we also know that district administrators are not the ones who are using those tools in classrooms. And so I would say it's also important not only to take a look at these initial data points, but to talk directly to teachers and students, even parents, and kind of opening up the conversation, showing them what you're considering and making it an open discussion around what would work best for your students.
Mhm. I completely agree, and I'll add in the stakeholder approach to those data-driven decisions, I think is what we're getting at here is having those who use the tools in the rooms to give feedback and those feedback loops. Those are as part of our report in the different indicators that we're really following. I think making sure there is opportunity for voice and for advocacy of those using the tools as we think about the community that we want to bring in and such. I think if we're not having the MTSS teachers involved in the tools that are being used to build IEPs, or if we don't have the teachers in the room, if we don't have the school administration in the room, I think there's an opportunity missed in the creation of these tools, but also in the ongoing feedback and loops that we would love to be seeing happening out there. And so, slightly separate from the report itself, but I think gets to a really good point around how data drives this conversation moving forward. Thank you so much for your question. Any others coming up for anyone? We have a little bit of time left, and maybe if you have a question. Oh, we do have one more. As I say that, let's do the last question for now. For districts that are just starting to use ESSA tiers, should we aim for a specific minimum, meaning what level, for all new tools, or should we strictly require higher tiers, levels 1 and 2, for core curriculum? Mary, you're the expert here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, it's a great question. I will say, and I actually heard Aaron say this at a conference recently, and I wholeheartedly agree that every tool should show that it's research based. And so every tool that you're considering, I honestly don't even believe you should let them in the door until they prove that they've done their research to show how their tool is aligned to existing research evidence, and they can show you a logic model that clearly shows here are the outcomes that we would expect if your tool is implemented in the classroom, and this is grounded in research. And so starting with that ESSA tier 4, I feel like is a minimum to even be able to have an initial conversation. Beyond that, I feel like ESSA tier 3, as I noted, can be really helpful if it's in a context similar to your own. I haven't heard many districts demand an ESSA tier 1 or a randomized control trial. In my mind, the sweet spot would be demanding an ESSA tier 3 or an ESSA tier 2 that's conducted in a study, conducted in a setting similar to your own. So similar learners, similar implementation timeframes, because sometimes districts don't have 60 minutes a week, to spend on computers. And so looking for that similar context is important. And then I'm going to even push the needle a little bit further and say, I think it's helpful to also say to the vendor, hey, we'd love to partner with you on a study after we purchase to help us see whether or not this tool actually moved the needle for our students. And so we're seeing that a little bit. I know we didn't talk about this much, but in outcomes-based contracts. And I've really been interested in that model because it pushes the needle a little bit more around showing that proof in your local context and situation.
And Mary, just to go a second further here, we got one more question that's directly related, which is we know that ecologically valid evidence should happen in classrooms, but since the pandemic, districts are less willing to put the additional benchmark or the burden of research on their schools. Is there advice you would give to EdTech providers navigating this conundrum?
It is certainly an interesting conundrum. I would say, you know, both both should come to the table with, again, like that minimum SF4. So I think a vendor coming with SF4 to say, hey, we've done the work to show that we're research based and this is a logic model showing the outcomes that we should have, and also give us a try. And so if you use us with your students, we can commit to doing a study with you where we both learn together. And I think, sometimes vendors are nervous about getting those negative results. But honestly, being open and candid about what's working and what's not working can help both the district and vendor figure things out and move things forward in the right direction. And honestly, if it's a research-based tool, I'm going to cross my fingers and say there's already some kind of initial evidence and some theoretical way that it should help students. And so it's less of a burden to be, for the district to be concerned about it not having any impact. They've done that initial legwork. And so that's why I think that SF4 is key. And then really saying that you're going to commit to research evidence together and putting yourself out there is important.
Thank you so much. I agree. And I think with that, we have another few minutes. So if other questions come up, please keep posting in the Q&A. For now, I will share with you sort of related to the conversations we've been having about research and building an evidence pipeline. I wanted to share with you all that Project Unicorn has a school system data survey. This is our 6th year of this national effort to measure growth of interoperability and identify gaps and recommendations for the field. We have a steering committee that gives really, really important and specific feedback throughout the year to help refine and make this survey what it is. But we open this up to all of you. To say we would really love to have you involved in this conversation. If you complete the survey, which we hope takes about 15 plus minutes of your time, you will get a $15 gift card. So I'll just throw that out there to start. But two, you receive a personalized school system profile that gives ready-made self-assessments and allows you to identify gaps in your settings. You're also then eligible for a complimentary technical assistance call with Innovate EDU and Project Unicorn to discuss your specific data challenges and receive some tailored resources. And it will also give you early access to an annual State of the Sector report that we put out. So this, we hope, provides a resource for you all to start to benchmark where you're at nationally. So that's an opportunity. We also have a school network and an EdTech vendor pledge where that one's really short. It does not take 15 minutes. It takes very little time. To say you're signing up to be part of this community. And that's one way to really stay involved with the work that we get to do with Instructure and the work that we all get to do with all of you. So we'd love for you to sign up and sign our pledge. So a small plug there because we really do want you to stay involved and thank you so much. I think without seeing any other questions, we can end a little bit early. Please stay connected with us, read the report, reach out, let us know what you think and what we can build into the next one. We hope to create and continue the conversation. But see Project Unicorn, see the report and the link to the Instructure page here on the screen. We will send out a recording and the slides to those of you that were able to join and those that signed up to get the recording. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.